Every summer of my life, since I could remember, had a rhythm when I came to Grandma Ruth's old farm. The rhythm was slow, steady, and predictable, like the gentle ticking of the clock above her kitchen sink. You could set your watch to the way the farm moved through its days. The rooster crowing at dawn, the creak of the porch swing in the afternoon breeze, the kettle whistling just before sunset. Mom always said it was good for me to get away for a while, to trade the noise of the city for the quiet of the countryside. But to me, quiet felt like another word for boring. The farm was the kind of place where the biggest excitement was when the neighbors' cows broke through the fence and wandered into the yard. I'd always arrive with my suitcase dragging across the gravel driveway, dust puffing up with each step, and my phone already warning me that the signal was too weak to do anything but send a text if I stood in just the right corner of the porch. Grandma would be waiting at the door, wearing her faded denim apron and that same half smile, warm, but a little reserved, like she was happy to see me but didn't quite know how to show it. She wasn't the kind of grandmother who smothered you with hugs and kisses. Her love was quieter. It was in the fresh cornbread cooling on the counter, the extra blanket folded neatly at the foot of my bed, the way she'd remember exactly how I took my tea. Her hands were rough from years of farm work, but they moved with a calm steadiness that made you feel like nothing could ever really go wrong here. That summer, last summer, started just like the others. The air was thick with the scent of hay and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle creeping up the side of the porch. Fireflies blinked lazily in the fields, and the sky stretched out so wide it made you feel small. I unpacked my clothes into the same old dresser in the upstairs guest room, its drawers lined with yellowing newspaper from decades ago. I thought I knew exactly how the next 3 weeks would go. Mornings feeding chickens and gathering eggs, afternoons helping in the garden or reading on the porch swing, evenings spent watching TV shows from the 80s that Grandma insisted were better than anything on now. But on the very first evening, I noticed something different. We were eating dinner, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans from her garden, when I saw Grandma glance toward the window more than once. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes flicking to the barn in the distance. She seemed distracted, like she was waiting for something. "Everything okay?" I asked, breaking a piece of cornbread in half. She blinked and looked back at me, forcing a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Just thinking about old times." The way she said old times caught my attention. Grandma never talked much about the past. If I asked about her childhood or when she first met Grandpa, she'd give short, vague answers and then change the subject. I'd always figured she just didn't have much to tell. That night, as I lay in bed, the house settling around me with its familiar creaks and groans, I heard something unusual. At first, it was faint, a soft thump, then a creak. It took me a moment to place it. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway or the stairs. It was coming from above me, from the attic. The attic had always been one of those mysterious, off-limits places in the house. There was a narrow pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling, but I'd only ever seen it open once, when Grandpa was still alive and went up to fetch Christmas decorations. I'd been 6 years old, standing at the bottom of the ladder craning my neck, desperate to see what treasures might be hidden up there. Mom had shooed me away, telling me it was just storage. Now, hearing those faint movements above my head made my mind spin. What could Grandma possibly be doing in the attic this late at night? The next morning, I kept an eye on her, but she seemed perfectly normal, feeding the chickens, folding laundry, baking biscuits. Still, I noticed she avoided going upstairs while I was around. And whenever she did, she was quick, like she didn't want to be caught. 2 days later, my curiosity got the better of me. After lunch, Grandma settled into her armchair in the living room with a paperback romance novel. She always read in that chair at the same time every day, and more often than not, she'd drift off into a nap around 2:30. Sure enough, by 2:37, her chin had dropped to her chest, the book slipping slightly in her lap. I crept upstairs, my heart pounding. The hallway was silent, the pull-down attic ladder folded neatly into the ceiling. I stood there for a moment, debating with myself. This was her house, her private space. but the thought of what might be hidden up there was like an itch I couldn't scratch. I reached up and pulled the cord. The ladder groaned loudly as it unfolded, and I froze, listening for movement downstairs. Nothing. I climbed slowly, the wood cool under my hands. As my head rose above the attic floor, the smell hit me, a mix of cedar, dust, and something faintly floral, like dried lavender. Light filtered in from a small round window, casting golden beams across the cluttered space. There were stacks of cardboard boxes, an old rocking chair draped with a quilt, and rows of mason jars filled with buttons and nails. But what caught my eye was the trunk. It was large, made of dark wood with black iron bands and a brass padlock. Something about it felt important, like it wasn't just holding objects, it was holding stories. I crouched beside it, running my fingers over the smooth, cool surface. The padlock was tarnished but sturdy. Locked, of course. I scanned the attic, and in the corner, I spotted a small wooden box. Inside were a few old coins, a broken pocket watch, and a tiny brass key. My pulse quickened. The key slid into the padlock easily. With a soft click, it opened. The lid creaked as I pushed it up, revealing bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. On top of them lay a black and white photograph. It was Grandma, but not the Grandma I knew. She was young, maybe 20, standing beside a man in a military uniform. They were smiling, but her eyes held something I couldn't quite name, hope, maybe, or fear. I picked up the first letter. My dearest Ruth, it began in careful handwriting. I don't know when I'll see you again, but I promise I'll come back for you. I barely had time to read more before the sound of footsteps creaking up the ladder froze me in place. Sarah? Grandma's voice called, tight and sharp. I turned to see her standing at the top, gripping the railing, her eyes locked on the open trunk. What? She said, her voice trembling. Are you doing? The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The air was crisp, carrying that damp after rain smell that always made the farm feel calmer. Normally, Grandma would already be in the kitchen by then, frying eggs or stirring oatmeal, humming some tune from decades ago. But that morning, the kitchen was empty. I found her outside, sitting on the porch swing, cradling a mug of coffee between her hands. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking out toward the wildflower field again. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to bring up the letters. Part of me felt like I'd crossed a line. The other part, the louder, nosier part, needed answers. Grandma, I said finally, taking a seat beside her. Who was James? Her eyes didn't move from the flowers. She didn't even flinch, which made me think she'd been expecting the question. A mistake, she said softly. That wasn't what I expected. A mistake? He seemed like he loved you. She laughed, not in a happy way, but in that kind of short, bitter way people laugh when they're trying to keep themselves from crying. He did, and I loved him. But sometimes love isn't enough. Her hands tightened around the mug, and I could see the faint tremor in her fingers. She didn't speak again for several seconds, and I was afraid she wouldn't at all. Then, she finally said, I met him when I was 18. He worked on the next farm over, helping his father with the cattle. We saw each other at the county fair. I remember it was July. Hot as sin. He bought me a lemonade and asked me to dance. I said no. Twice. Then I said yes. I smiled despite myself. Sounds romantic. It was, she said. And that's the problem. It was too romantic. We were young. We didn't care about anything but each other. But his father hated my family. Thought we were poor and beneath them. My parents didn't like him much either. Said he was reckless. Were they right? She didn't answer. She just looked down into her coffee like the answer was written in the dark liquid. What happened? I pressed. She glanced at me, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes. A flash of fear, maybe even regret. Some truths, she said, are best left in the past. But I couldn't leave it there. Not after reading the letters. Did you ever see him again? Her gaze went back to the flowers. "No," she whispered. "Not after that summer." Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. I didn't believe her, not fully. You don't write letters like that and just stop. Something had happened. Something she didn't want to tell me. That afternoon, she went into town again, and I went straight back to the attic. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. The letters were all in chronological order, tied neatly into bundles. I picked up where I'd left off, reading the ones that came after James' father forbade him from seeing her. The next few letters were short and desperate, promises to meet in secret, to run away together. Then there was one that made me pause. "Anna, I have to tell you something. I can't put it in writing, not here. Meet me by the old windmill at midnight. No one can know. Please, just trust me." I flipped through the next stack, expecting a letter describing the meeting, but instead, nothing. The date jumped forward by months. The tone of James' handwriting had changed. It was colder, distant. "Anna, I'm sorry. This is goodbye. No explanation. No details. Just an ending." I stared at the letter for a long time, feeling frustrated and oddly sad for someone I'd never even met. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. People who wrote love letters that tender didn't just walk away. Then I noticed something strange. The letter wasn't signed James. It was signed J. All the earlier letters had his full name. I dug deeper into the trunk and found a small leather notebook shoved under the last bundle of envelopes. Its cover was cracked, and some pages were stuck together from age. The handwriting inside was different, not James', not Grandma's. The entries were short, more like notes than a diary. One page caught my attention. "Windmill, July 22nd. Didn't show. Anna was there. Saw someone else instead. Changed everything." The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. No name, no date on the year, just that cryptic message. The windmill. I'd never even seen a windmill on the property before. But when I thought about it, there was an old structure past the tree line that I'd always assumed was just some abandoned shed. I closed the trunk, my mind buzzing with questions. Who wrote that note? Why hadn't James shown up? And who was the someone else that changed everything? That evening at dinner, I decided to test her. "Grandma," I said casually between bites of roast chicken, "do we still have that old windmill out back?" Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. For a split second, her face went pale. But then she set her fork down and said, "That's not a windmill. It's just an old grain tower. Dangerous, too. You stay away from it." Which, of course, meant I was going there first thing in the morning. Later that night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the ticking of the grandfather clock down the hall. My mind kept replaying the image of her face when I mentioned the windmill, how quickly her mask had slipped before she forced it back into place. Whatever happened between her and James, that windmill, or grain tower, or whatever she wanted to call it, was part of the story she didn't want me to know. And I had the feeling that once I found out, there would be no going back. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains, casting long golden beams across my bedroom floor. I felt an unusual mix of excitement and nervousness, like I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. Breakfast was quiet. Grandma was unusually reserved, carefully avoiding my gaze. I packed a small notebook and my phone in my backpack and slipped out the back door before she could stop me. The path to the old grain tower, the so-called windmill, wasn't far, but it was hidden behind a thick wall of oak and maple trees. The farm felt different this morning, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for me. I stepped into the clearing, and there it was. The weathered structure, standing crooked against the sky, its wooden boards gray and splintered with age. The metal blades that must once have turned in the wind were bent and frozen, silent for decades. My heart pounded as I approached. The door was a heavy slab of wood, hanging slightly off its hinges. The rusted lock was long gone, and the hinges creaked ominously as I pushed it open. Inside was dim and dusty, filled with the smell of earth and forgotten memories. Wooden beams crossed overhead, and old sacks of grain lay in piles on the dirt floor. But what caught my attention was a small box tucked beneath a broken window. I knelt and pulled it out carefully. It was made of dark wood, with delicate carvings on the lid. Inside, wrapped in a faded cloth, was a bundle of papers tied with twine. My hands trembled as I untied it. It was a journal. The handwriting was neat and flowing, not Grandma's, not James', but someone else's. I opened the first page and read, July 22nd, 1961. I waited by the windmill for hours. James never came. Instead, Anna showed up looking pale and scared. She said she had to tell me the truth, a secret that could change everything. My breath caught. This was the missing piece. But who was the writer? I flipped to the next page. Anna's eyes were full of tears. She told me about her family's plans, about how her father had arranged a marriage for her with a man she didn't love. James was reckless, dangerous in their eyes. If anyone found out about their letters, the consequences would be terrible. I realized the writer was someone close to Anna, someone who cared enough to record her story. The pages revealed a heartbreaking tale of love crushed by fear and duty. Anna's family had been powerful in the county, wealthy and proud. They saw James as a threat, a poor farm boy who would ruin their reputation. But what stunned me most was what came next. Anna begged me to help her escape, to run away with James, but I could only promise to keep her secret. That night, James never showed. He was arrested for a crime he didn't commit, framed by those who wanted him gone. Anna never saw him again. I closed the journal slowly, my mind racing. A crime? Arrested? Framed? None of this was in the letters Grandma showed me. I had so many questions, and the answers felt farther away than ever. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. Found something interesting? Grandma's voice was soft but firm. I jumped and turned around. She looked older somehow, as if the years of holding onto this secret had worn her down. I found the journal, I said, holding it out. Who wrote this? She hesitated, then sighed. That was Ruth, Anna's best friend. She kept the journal safe for all these years. I didn't want you to find it yet. Some stories are hard to tell, even after all this time. I felt my throat tighten. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why keep it hidden? Because it was painful, she whispered. Because sometimes protecting the ones you love means keeping the truth buried. Tears welled in her eyes as she sat down on the dusty floor beside me. I was that scared girl, you know. I loved James more than anything. But my family, they chose a different path for me. I lost him, and for years, I blamed myself. I thought if I never remembered, it would hurt less. I took her hand gently. But now, she said, I want you to know the whole story, the good, the bad, and the heartbreaking. So you understand where we came from. And maybe forgive me for keeping you in the dark. I nodded, overwhelmed by everything. The farm, the letters, the journal. It wasn't just a summer getaway anymore. It was a place where love and pain had been buried, waiting for me to uncover the truth. We sat there for a long time, 2 generations linked by secrets and silence, both hoping that by sharing the story, the wounds might finally begin to heal. The farmhouse was unusually quiet that afternoon when Grandma began to share the story of the trial, the part she had never spoken of before. Her voice was low, heavy with memories she'd carried for decades. It started with a false accusation, she said, staring at her hands folded on the table. James was accused of stealing a valuable horse from a wealthy neighbor. It was a lie, but the whole town believed it. His family's reputation was already fragile, and this sealed his fate. I listened intently, picturing the young man I'd met in the letters, the one who loved Grandma fiercely, but had been cruelly framed. Did they have any proof? I asked. No. But when you're poor and the son of a farmhand, the word of a rich man carries more weight than the truth, she said bitterly. James was arrested and thrown into jail. The trial lasted only days, and the verdict was guilty. She paused, her eyes clouded with pain. James could have run away. He had the chance. But he stayed, because he wanted to clear his name for me, for us. Did anyone help him? I asked. Grandma shook her head. No one dared. Not while Anna's family had so much influence. They wanted him gone. And with him out of the way, they forced me to accept a life I never wanted. Tears welled in her eyes. I was only 18, but they arranged my engagement to a man I barely knew, a man my parents chose for wealth and security, not love. Her voice cracked as she continued. I wrote letters to James from time to time, hoping the truth would come out, hoping he'd be free. But those letters were all I had left of him. The weight of her silence made the room feel smaller, like the walls themselves were holding in decades of heartbreak. I never told my family the truth about what I felt, she said. I buried my love for James beneath duty and fear. What happened to James? I whispered. He served 5 years in prison before new evidence proved his innocence. But by then, the damage was done. His family moved away, and he disappeared from the town and my life. I felt a lump form in my throat. The boy from the letters had been betrayed by the people he trusted most. The woman who loved him had been trapped in a cage of expectations. Did you ever see him again? I asked. Grandma shook her head slowly. No. But every summer, I came back to this farm, hoping somehow to feel close to him. I looked at her, tears now streaming down her cheeks. Grandma, I'm so sorry. She reached out and pulled me into a tight hug. It's okay. I want you to know this part of our history, so you understand why I kept it hidden, for fear it would break us again. We sat in silence, surrounded by the fading light of the afternoon, sharing a moment of understanding that spanned generations. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the farm was more than just a quiet place to spend summer breaks. It was a place of love and loss, secrets and sacrifices. And now, it was my turn to carry the story forward. The next morning, the farm felt different, lighter somehow, as if the heavy shadows of the past had finally begun to lift. I woke early, the memories of Grandma's stories still fresh, echoing in my mind like a fragile melody. I went outside and sat on the porch steps, watching the sun rise over the golden fields. The breeze rustled the leaves of the old maple tree, carrying with it whispers of years gone by, whispers of love, heartbreak, and hope. Grandma joined me, carrying a basket of fresh eggs. She settled beside me, her eyes filled with a quiet strength I hadn't noticed before. You know, she said softly, sometimes we think the past is a chain that binds us. But maybe it's more like a road, one that leads us to where we need to be. I nodded, still trying to piece it all together. What will you do now? With everything we found, she smiled faintly. I'm going to tell the family. Not just the happy memories, but the painful ones too. It's time for us to heal. We spent the day going through more letters, photos, and keepsakes, each one a puzzle piece of a life lived with courage and heartache. I saw a new side of Grandma, the fierce girl who had dared to love against all odds, the woman who carried her scars quietly, and now the grandmother who was ready to share her truth. That evening, the family gathered in the living room, my parents, my cousins, and Grandma. I passed around the letters and the journal, watching as their faces changed from curiosity to awe, and sometimes tears. We talked late into the night, sharing stories, asking questions, and slowly unraveling the threads of a history none of us fully knew. There was pain, yes, but also forgiveness, and a newfound appreciation for the strength it took to survive. In the weeks that followed, the farm seemed to bloom with new life. Grandma planted a small garden near the windmill, filling the space once shadowed by silence with vibrant colors and fresh earth. One afternoon, as I helped her plant sunflower seeds, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for finding the courage to ask, to listen. It's not always easy to face the past, but it's the only way forward." I smiled, feeling a deep connection, not just to Grandma, but to the generations before me who had loved, lost, and lived. That summer, the farm was no longer just a quiet place to spend vacation. It was a sanctuary of stories, a testament to the power of truth and the healing that comes with it. And as I watched the sunflowers grow tall and strong, I knew that love, even when hidden for decades, could bloom again in the light.